In this video, we're going to be replacing the rear wheel bearing on this 2011 Honda Odyssey. All right, with a 22mm socket, we're going to take off our rear wheel. Okay, we're going to remove our caliper. We have two bolts. They're going to be 12mm. Take those out now. Now from here, we're going to remove our caliper. What I like to do is use a flathead screwdriver, a small pry bar, and just pull my caliper back evenly, top and bottom. Just work it off of the pads. And in the rear of the vehicle, we're not going to hang this caliper out of the way. What we're going to do is just take it and rotate it up. And now we can remove our brake pads. Again, we're just going to pull them from either the top or the bottom away from the rotor, rotate them out. Now we have two 17mm caliper bracket bolts. We have a 17mm socket on a breaker bar. Now, something to take note of is that there are two washers between the knuckle and the caliper bracket. If those drop out, you want to relocate them and put them back into position. When you put your bracket back in, just be aware that they may fall out. And we can remove our caliper bracket. Our two washers stayed into position. You can just barely see the edge of it here. So at this point here, your rotor should be held in by one screw. Ours was broken off a long time ago, so we don't have to remove that, but now you would remove that screw. Once you have that free, you may have to give your rotor a couple of taps left and right to free it up, or from here, from the back side, and then rotate it and do it again. The idea is to work your rotor off even and right off. Okay, so here are our two washers that we were talking about. We're actually going to take these off. So they go in just like this. There's one. There's the other. All right, on the back here, we have four, 1, 2, 3, and 4 bolts holding in our hub from the back. They're going to be 17mm. Again, we're going to use a breaker bar and get these started. All right, so we've taken out the bolt that holds the brake hose to the knuckle, which should allow us a little bit more space to get to the two bolts holding in the back side of our bearing. All right, so we're just going to remove that bracket off of the knuckle. Now what we can do is just shift this aside a little bit and give us more room, more access to those two bolts. One more step on this bracket is to remove the speed sensor from this, just in case. And by this, I mean just remove the speed sensor from the bracket. All right, so at this point we have our last bolt about halfway threaded in. We've noticed that our bearing or our hub unit is actually loose in front. So in this case, you want to hold the front, you want to hold your bearing while you take out your last bolt. You don't want that to fall on your foot. All right, so we can see our bearing is free here. We're going to work it out the front, like so. Now, just a quick note, this actually looks like it's been replaced fairly recently. This O-ring here, our new bearing comes with a new O-ring. If yours doesn't, do not reuse your old O-ring. Make sure you replace that. Okay, before we put our new bearing in place, this one looks fantastically clean. What you want to do is make sure your inner area here is clean and as close to this as you can get it. Also, where the flange meets up here, make sure this is clean as well. And you'll notice the bolt holes are different, top to side, which means that our bearing has to go in a certain way. So we'll line that up and we'll guide our bearing in. Now we can start to reinstall our bolts from the back side. What may happen is if you look through your holes here and you notice that your bolt holes and your flange are not perfectly lined up, what we can use is a Phillips screwdriver to get in here and just lightly move your flange left or right, whatever you need to do to get those holes to line up. So far, ours look pretty good. We'll start putting the bolts in from the back. Okay, so we're going to take our bolts and we're going to start by hand threading them in as far as we can get them. We're going to start all of our bolts this way, and then we're going to start working them in a crisscross pattern to pull our hub in flush and flat. Okay, now that we have them all finger tight, we still have about a 1/16 inch gap between our hub flange and our backing plate, or our knuckle. Come in a crisscross pattern and start tightening these up until we feel good resistance. The crisscross pattern will help ensure that our hub goes in flat and not at an angle. So you have good resistance here. Now once you feel good resistance after your first round here all the way around, go ahead and take a look at the front side. Make sure that gap is either closed up or closing up. All right, now we're going to come back with our 17 millimeter. We're going to torque all these 4 bolts down in a crisscross pattern. We're going to torque them to 72 foot-pounds. Okay, so now we can put our brake hose and speed sensor bracket back into position. There is a little hook on top that will need to go into its channel. Once you have that lined up, we can thread in our bolt. And from here, we can take our speed sensor wire, push it back into this bracket, just push straight down. Okay, so at this point, we're going to clean our hub surface here, so that way our rotor mates up to a nice clean surface. You can see this one's in great shape. So we're going to hit it with some brake clean, get rid of the greases and oils. Give it a good wipe. We're going to spray a little anti-seize. I'm just going to put a piece of paper towel back here. All right, so what we're going to do is put our rotor on. If you did have your Phillips screws to put it back in, now would be the time to do that. All right, and now we're going to put our 2 caliper washers back in between the knuckle and the bracket. They're just going to press into place. Now we can take our caliper bracket to the vehicle, making sure not to knock our washers loose, and thread in our caliper bolts. And our 2 caliper bracket bolts, we come back, we can torque these down to 65 foot-pounds. Okay, now we can put our wear indicator on our rear pad. Just press that into position. and we can put it into our new hardware. And our front pad. So we're going to have to compress our piston. We have a compression tool here. You can use a C-clamp. You can use a pair of locking pliers. Whatever works for you to get the piston compressed. All right, so we can take our bleeder screw cover off. We're just going to use a pair of needle nose pliers. All right, with a 10mm socket, we're going to crack open our bleeder screw about 1/4 to a 1/2 turn, just enough to get some fluid started. Before you break open your bleeder screw, make sure you have some kind of drip catch down, either a rag or a pan. We're going to have a little bit of fluid come out. So again, with a 10mm socket, open up that bleeder. With that bleeder open, let's compress our piston. Once we're done compressing our piston, we want to immediately close our bleeder. That way we're not allowing air back in. All right, now we can release our compression tool. All right, now we can take our caliper, put it back into position. What we're going to do is actually squeeze our pads together, push our caliper onto our pin, over our pads, and into place. All right, so now we're going to thread in our caliper bolts. You can see here that our pins have a channel that they go into, which stops them from rotating while we tighten these down. So if you're not able to get your bolt in or anything lined up, make sure that those are in position. Do the same thing on the top. I have to rotate our pin. And thread in our bolt. All right, now we can torque down our 2 caliper bolts here. They're going to be torqued down to 25 foot-pounds. At this point, we're going to crack open our bleeder screw. It's going to be a 10mm. What we're looking for is a clean flow of brake fluid with no air brakes and no bubbles in it. Now we can close that up. Now what I like to do, once you're all done, is hit it with some brake clean and blow that dry. What that's going to do is wash off any brake residue, so when this dries, if you look back here and you see a wet spot anywhere, you know you still have a leak. And then the last step is to replace your cover. At this point, what you want to do is go into the vehicle, pump your brakes 3 or 4 times, fully as far as you can to the floor. Come back here to the rear wheel, crack your bleeder screw open, about a 1/2 turn to a full turn. What you're looking for to come out of your bleeder screw is a clean, undisrupted flow, no air bubbles, no foam, and no breaks in the fluid. Once you get that, go ahead and turn and close your bleeder screw, and you're all done. All right, now with the vehicle on the ground, we're going to torque our lug nuts to 94 foot-pounds. We're going to use a 22mm socket. We're going to go in a crisscross pattern.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.